Hope so.
So, hi. Hello, hello. Can you hear us? Presumably you can. Yes, we can start. Let's go. Okay, are we ready to go? Can you see our slides as well as our faces? Yeah, okay, good. Looks like we're in business. So, hi, I'm Ross Anderson. I'm Professor of Security Engineering at Cambridge and at Edinburgh, and this is Ilia Shumailov, with whom I have been working on some interesting topics around adversarial machine learning. And the title of our talk is Situational Awareness, Robots, Manners, and Stress. So, what's going to happen once humans and robots start interacting at scale? Well, there's going to be all sorts of conflict. Because for millions of years, we humans have been trying to cheat each other, and those people who were better at lying or better at detecting lying by others tended to have more grandchildren. This is the Machiavellian brain hypothesis for how we developed our high levels of intelligence. For the last 40 years or so, humans have been trying to hack computers, and this is now a real big deal, ransomware and all the rest of it. And more recently, AIs have been hacking humans. As the algorithms used by YouTube and Facebook and so on to maximize attention end up favoring extremist content. Now, in the future, it's about to be all against all. And so there's all sorts of interesting aspects of this future conflict, how humans might interact with robots that we meet on the street at one end, and at the other end, how drone swarms could fight each other in war. And so how are we going to be able to cope with this? So 2 years ago, when we could still travel, I was fortunate enough to be visiting and working in UC Berkeley. UC Berkeley is very hilly, and for those of us who spent a bit of time there, you must have seen Kiwi drones. They are super, super cute. They are the food delivery drones. You see them everywhere around campus. Well, at least you could 2 years ago. Presumably they still exist there. And one day I was walking up the hill in Berkeley, and I found myself sharing a pavement with one of those delivery drones. And as we were sharing the pavement and going in the same direction, at one point, the Kiwi drone has started behaving oddly and started bumping into me. I've tried evading the Kiwi drone by speeding up and going to the side, but nevertheless, it sped up and similarly started bumping into me. And at one point, I couldn't take this anymore, so I had to kind of jump off the pavement, and this is what caused the drone to speed up and just go away. But this interaction has reminded me a lot of the kind of interactions with dogs, with the wild dogs you find in Russia, and in my childhood, I had a bit of such interaction. Well, and of course, if drones interact with people in ways that people don't like, then people hit back. And in Berkeley, there are a number of cases of people kicking over these delivery drones and also security drones that some buildings had and leaving them on their sides or on their backs helpless. And as robots interact with humans more and more, and by robots, I mean in the general sense, systems that incorporate machine learning components, we can expect ever more tension and conflict. After all, many of the websites that we visit are trying to dun us of our money. They're trying to sell us things we don't need with credit that we can't afford, and they hustle us in all sorts of ways. And so we're beginning to start to see robots of various kinds trying to deceive and bully humans, and humans trying to outwit robots. Recently, in the war between Azerbaijan and Armenia, drone swarms were absolutely decisive, and since the Azeris had better drone swarms than the Armenians just lost. This message is not lost on the world's armed forces, who are buying drones like you can't believe. And Bruce Schneier is now talking of a nightmare where AI bots will be hacking each other all the time, and where we end up becoming collateral damage. So what's the best way of understanding this? Well, here's our insight: situational awareness. is one thing that's missing largely from computer security at the moment, but it's something that is a real big deal in the real world in which we evolved. Now, animals want to know, am I safe or am I under attack? Must I be alert or can I relax? Because chronic stress and fatigue are toxic. And so as humans, we tend to prefer environments where we get early warning of predators. Our idea of a beautiful garden is rolling grassland with occasional trees in it, because in the ancestral evolutionary environment, you could then see the lions coming, and if need be, you could climb a tree to avoid them. And so this is deeply baked into our DNA from millions and millions of years ago. And yet situational awareness has been largely ignored by conventional security research. The reason for this is that cryptographic mechanisms and access control mechanisms are designed to stop all adversaries all the time. Now, that may be the case in narrow computer environments, but it's too expensive for humans because we face too wide a range of threats. And we can't all live in castles and drive around in tanks, unless perhaps you're the president of the USA or Russia or maybe the Queen of England. But for the rest of us, it's too expensive. And one of the really important things is that defending against all possible threats is far too expensive for machine learning systems. Now, Ilia's research is funded by Bosch, the German company which makes car parts. And since this was started by Robert Bosch in the 19th century when he invented the spark plug, it's become the biggest car parts supplier and is now one of the world leaders in machine vision for car safety. Since 2012, deep neural networks have become the way that you do image recognition because they just work so much better than anything else. But once that revolution had happened, very quickly, two separate groups realized that deep neural networks are very vulnerable to adversarial inputs, and making them robust damages performance. So if attacks are possible but rare and not scalable, can't we just detect them instead and alarm? You see, what people were worried about is that a bad person might project some wicked image on a road bridge and cause cars to crash. But then again, anybody can just go and kick some traffic cones into a hole in the road and cause a car to crash, and we don't panic about that. So perhaps the response isn't to make machine vision systems robust against adversarial inputs, but just to alarm when an adversarial input is seen. But then the problem is, how do you make the alarm hard to defeat? Now, here's an example of the kind of adversarial input we're talking about. The picture on the left is a stock picture of a bird. And if you decide that you want to turn that into a car, you use a technique called gradient descent to come up with a few tiny tweaks to the image. And the center image here is a very much amplified version of what those tiny tweaks are. And then the resulting image, the one on the right, is visually indistinguishable to a human from the bird on the left, only now it's categorized as a car. And these examples can be found for all deep neural network models. They're easy to find and they're often transferable. So, Ilia, how would we go about alarming on the existence of adversarial inputs?
So the problem is a bit more than just adversarial inputs. So let's consider a very simple example where we're trying to build machine learning models to separate cats and dogs. So let's imagine that the green blob on the left is where all of the data points for the dogs are located, and then the green blob on the right is where all of the cat data points are located. The red points you see on there are going to be what we call the adversarial examples. Those are adversarial data points which looks like dogs but get classified by the models as a cat, and similarly on the right those are images of cats but they get classified as dogs. The thing that we don't really know what to do about is this yellow space in between, which is full of images which are valid data points, yet they are neither cats nor they are dogs. And simple examples here would be, for example, Pokemon. You can see a Pikachu. It's not a cat, it's not a dog, yet we need to do something about it as we see it. Similarly, you can find a whole space of morphs of cat dogs, which are sort of cats, sort of dogs, or anything in between. You can think about this. If you had a dog with a tattoo of a cat on it, well, what do you do with this? Yet we need to make decisions about it, or we need to decide not to make any decision whatsoever. Similarly, you can try and ask the model which works with cats and dogs to classify Malevich's black square, and yet again, we need to come up with a decision on what to do here.
So here's the idea that we have, the taboo trap. Now, in society, we've got taboos, where we have certain things that you're not allowed to say and other things that you're not even allowed to think about. And so if you've ever taken part in raising children, you know that you train your kids to have beautiful manners, and then age 5, 6, 7, you send them off to school, and within a week, these beautiful, innocent young children know some very non-innocent words, some words that your mother really doesn't like. So they break social taboos, initially without knowing it, and this tells you that they've been exposed to adversarial input. So here's the idea. Can we set taboos on outputs or activations during training and alarm when we see them? And the answer is that we can indeed. This works very well. It takes a bit of work to figure out how to do it properly, but once you have figured out how to do it, you can diversify a machine learning model with different taboos. And this means that if you're Bosch and you're selling a machine vision system to Volkswagen and Mercedes and so on, you can sell them each a slightly different system so that the same adversarial samples won't work against all of them. And if you were selling, for example, a security TV camera system, you were selling it both to homes and to banks. You could sell a cheap version to people's homes for $10 a camera and an expensive version to banks for $1,000 a camera. You can have different models so that a camouflage mask that would let you sneak past a home camera won't help you to sneak through a bank vault. And this is really interesting because it's the first interaction of something like cryptographic keys with machine learning. And there are other alarms that other people have worked on. Many firms who invest in machine learning are really worried about model extraction, the idea that somebody might send a number of carefully crafted inquiries to your machine learning model, and the information that they extract then lets you reconstruct it. And Asokan in Finland and his colleagues have come up with neat ways of detecting them, and this convinces us that there too, alarms will be the cheapest option. But as well as confidentiality and integrity, we worry about availability. Now, in classical computer security, this was the last thing we looked at. We didn't look at it until about the 1990s. And so the question is whether we can come up with attacks on the availability of machine learning systems. In other words, if there's a robot drone coming after you or listening into your phone calls, is there some way that you might be able to jam it? Ilia.
This is where we've discovered sponge examples. So sponge examples, similarly to what you've seen before, where a bird turned into an automobile. Here we're trying to find small changes to inputs in order to cause machine learning models to take significantly more time or consume a lot more energy. Indeed, we find that we are capable of finding such perturbations. We are capable of finding those examples, which cause machine learning models to take significantly more time in order to perform their computation and come up with a decision. As well as doing so, we find that the hardware ends up overheating because it has to do more and more work, and you can also damage hardware in different ways. Similarly, we have been experimenting a lot more with sponge examples, and we found that in case of certain NLP systems, we can cause a lot more troubles. And in here, you can see an example of a screenshot we took literally earlier, 10 minutes ago, where a simple message, send money to account 1234, is translated by a machine translation system provided by Google as please send money to an account 4321. And all of this is done with similar tricks we've discovered for sponge examples, and in this case, with BD characters, something you absolutely require if you're speaking Hebrew or Arabic.
So the BD characters basically let you reverse the direction of transcription from left to right to left. And of course, Hebrew goes from right to left, as does Arabic. But both of these languages write their numbers from left to right. And so you need a means of manipulating character order if you're going to make stuff fit together and fit into the column. And this gives you an extraordinarily powerful way of disrupting natural language processing systems. And this is only one of many ways that we've discovered. Just switching language, for example, can be a real pipeline stall. We found cases with Google Translate, translating from Russian to English, where a couple of Chinese characters would slow it down by a factor of 5,000. So what are the lessons learned from this? Well, security engineering is something that machine learning people need to pay attention to. Machine learning systems need to sanitize their inputs, which normal computer security people have known since the 1980s of the Morris worm. They must also be designed for worst case rather than average case performance, or place limits on the amount of time the computation can take. And again, this is something that people figured out with denial of service attacks. And the fact that real systems engineers have known this stuff for decades doesn't help, because many machine learning deployments ignore it. And the security research community isn't so interested in this work because they say, hey, how come these guys were so stupid as to just take any old user input and act on it? That's just as dumb as dog snot. Whereas the machine learning people say, why bother me with fancy characters? I've got wonderful models of human language. I'm not interested in the engineering aspects. And so the important things fall down the gap in the middle between the expertise of the security community and the machine learning community. So what's the bigger picture? Well, this brings in, I think, a new research agenda, and one is a role for manners. Because how animals manage threat and response in the evolutionary environment of, say, Africa, where we evolved, is that they've got critical distances for flight and fight, which differ within and across species. Typically, an animal will slink away when you're twice as far away from it as the distance at which it will turn and fight you. And this means that you tend to be attacked only if you corner an animal or surprise it. Similarly, we humans have got a number of different distances. There's intimate, personal, social, and public space. And these instincts are overlaid with social norms so that we can interact with unknown people, so that you can actually get 300 people to sit in an airplane and cross the Atlantic, which would not have been possible of the human beings of 20,000 years ago. They would have been busy throwing pointy sticks at each other because manners then were rather different. So we've got these systems of manners which are built out into new applications, such as in driving. And this is a real showstopper for self-driving cars, because one of the things that very few, indeed no self-driving cars can do properly, is how to interact when turning across traffic. Because the robot doesn't know how to nod to people, to wave to people, to just inch forward slightly as a signal. And it's just the same if you're trying to drive through a congested suburban street where there are cars parked on each side and cars have to give way to oncoming cars. Robots can't do that. It's just not been an interesting subject. And the amazing thing is that although you have got AI and everything nowadays, you don't have people studying AI and manners. So to pull it all together, we humans evolved sensitivity to threat and risk, and this is out of sync with the modern world in ways that get exploited by both marketers and criminals. And people are increasingly learning to be wary online and to feel the hustle. And if people build robot systems that behave in the same way that websites do, then people are not going to like robots. They're going to be kicked over. They're going to be thrown in the river. So machine learning systems, as they become embodied, are going to have to involve a similar sensitivity, and they're also going to have to involve a sensitivity to when am I under attack, because alarms are cheaper than engineered robustness. And what this is going to mean in practice is that instead of your car driving more slowly because it's worried about adversarial samples, then if it sees one, it will probably just slow down to 20 kilometers per hour and ask the driver to take over. So things will be more adaptive. It'll be more complex, but people are going to have to deal with the complexity. So here's some future research questions. How do we co-evolve manners for coexistence of humans and robots or other kinds of AIs or IAs or whatever you want to call them? Do manners evolve in the same sort of way that a pigeon becomes a creole? Do you end up getting a proper grammar coming out of it in a way that AIs could get a handle on? Will manners evolve with multiple layers of deception, as you find in warfare and in commerce and in society as large? What's warfare going to look like when there are lots of robots? Will you have a role for honor, or will robots just be programmed to stab everybody in the back? Or might robots become superb at manners like the best butlers and use this to manipulate us? So there's all sorts of possibilities there that nobody really started looking at. But if you want some of the basics, my security engineering book is online on my website, and a number of the chapters are there for free download. So there we have it, and I'm happy to take questions.